The rest of the story. Ever since his childhood in Troy Grove, Illinois, Jimmy Butler was ridiculed mostly because of how he looked. His nose was quite long, and it was pointed, and his upper lip stuck way out, like a duck's bill. In fact, that's what the other youngsters in Troy Grove called him, Duck Bill. "Hey, Duck Bill," they'd say, "why aren't you in the pond with the other ducks?" Jimmy never answered, not even when the bullies in school taunted him with that hated nickname and threatened him with violence. He never responded, because, you see, there was a daydream that kept his mind otherwise occupied, the thought of someday becoming a famous professional gambler, somebody dashing, perhaps even a little dangerous, but mainly somebody that others would envy. One day that ambition propelled Jimmy west of the Mississippi in search of his own personal fame and fortune. But what he found instead, well, that was the rest of the story. The American West Jim Butler discovered was scarcely as romantic as the one he dreamed of in Troy Grove, Illinois. Most surprising of all was the widespread corruption he encountered. But rather than return to a peaceful, pallid life back east, Jim stayed, and he conformed. He went on the city payroll in Abilene, Kansas. He was supposed to rid the town of gambling and prostitution. But within weeks, he was collecting protection money from gamblers and pimps. He was spending his afternoons at the card tables and his evenings in the red light district. Predictably, I suppose, Jim was fired after a few months on the job, and from there, the low road led straight downhill. He tried prospecting. He found only fool's gold. He even resurrected his boyhood fantasy of becoming a traveling gambler, but he lost more than he won. He did get a job as a freight company guard once. He was a freight company guard, and he did manage to shoot a rancher who got in an argument with his employer. But the rancher was unarmed, and Jim was hiding behind a calico curtain when he plugged him. So Jim was unemployed again. As a matter of fact, for that little encounter, Jim barely escaped a murder conviction. Toward the end of his life, he was often arrested, but only for vagrancy, no visible means of support, the complaints always read. And then one day, when he was not quite 40, he was playing poker, and somebody shot him dead. Now, the strange thing is that you've known Jim all your life. At least you've known the person into which he was transformed by an imaginative magazine writer more than 100 years ago. He was transformed into somebody else before you read about him. The writer's name was George Nicholas. Probably he would never have written a word about Jim, except for that unkind nickname which Jim had been called as a boy. Or shall I say the way Jim kind of turned it around? It was just such a good nickname that George Nicholas could not resist building a hero around that name. Well, by now you know the lad from Troy Grove, Illinois was anything but a hero. But that's the way he ended up in the pages of fiction, a real hero. For the ne'er-do-well drifter, James Butler Hickok, could not stand being called Duck Bill, so they changed the name to Wild Bill Hickok. And now you know the rest of the story.
And now the rest of the story. James Butler Hickok was born in LaSalle County, Illinois in May of 1837. Wild Bill Hickok became known as a gunslinger early on. The fanciful stories helped build his reputation. No one knows exactly how many people Hickok killed. Wild Bill Hickok has become a legend, and I want to tell you about one specific shootout which helped to make him a legend. In Hollywood films, we often see a quick-draw gunfight, a duel on Main Street. Man, they're exciting. These quick-draw duels are based on the legendary gunfight between Wild Bill Hickok and Davis Tutt. Here's the story. Hickok considered himself a gambler. He loved to play poker. He even died while playing poker. By most accounts, 28-year-old Hickok and another gambler, 26-year-old Davis Tutt became friends. While in Springfield, Missouri in 1865, something destroyed that friendship. Some argue that it was a woman who came between them, and others claim it was over unsettled poker debts. But whatever it was, it all came to a head on the evening of July the 20th, 1865. Hickok was playing poker in an upstairs room at the Lion House just 2 blocks south of the town square in Springfield. Hickok was also renting a room in the Lion House. Now let me give you a little perspective here. This is Systematic Savings Bank, but in the 1865, this is where the Lion House stood. You see those trees in the distance? Those are on the old courthouse square, but at the time there were no trees in the square. During the poker game, Hickok placed his pocket watch on the poker table. Davis claimed that Hickok owed him $35. Hickok said it was only $25, which he was willing to pay. He told Davis that he had the money on book at the Lion House. Hickok's prized pocket watch sat on the table. Davis snatched up the pocket watch and said he would keep it until he, Hickok, paid what he owed him. Now, Hickok could have easily drawn his pistol and reclaimed the pocket watch, but he hoped to end the row without bloodshed. As they walked downstairs to get the money, Davis told Hickok that the amount owed was $45, but he would settle for $35. Hickok refused and said he would only pay him the $25 he owed him. Davis left the Lion House. As Davis was walking away, Hickok warned him not to wear his prized pocket watch on the courthouse square or on the street. You see, Hickok had a reputation to protect. Shortly thereafter, Hickok told the owner of the Lion's House to tell Davis to bring his watch back in 1 hour and he would receive the $25. He told the owner to tell Davis that if he did not return the watch, something else would be done. Of course, Davis did not return to the Lion House, did not return the pocket watch. On the following day, a friend of Hickok's walked out of the courthouse towards a general store that stood here. He stopped in front of the general store to talk with Hickok briefly. Hickok told him, "Davis Tutt's taken my watch." Now, Davis Tutt was standing by the courthouse, which stood on this spot. Hickok was waiting. Word quickly spread that something was going to happen between Hickok and Davis, and a crowd gathered. Davis flaunted Hickok's watch. Davis walked 30 to 35 paces from the courthouse toward the northwest corner of the square near this spot and stopped. A metal circular plaque in the road marks the spot where Tutt was supposed to have stood. Hickok took a few paces forward and stopped. Another circular plaque in the road marks this spot. Davis and Hickok stood 75 yards apart. At the same instant, both pulled their pistols and fired. The shots happened so quickly that most people said that they only heard a single shot but saw the smoke and flash from both guns. Davis Tutt's shot missed Hickok and struck the building behind him. Hickok's shot struck Davis in the chest. Davis ran toward the courthouse where he collapsed and died. Hickok retrieved his watch. Davis Tutt is buried here in Maple Park Cemetery in Springfield, just 1 mile south of the site of the shootout. Davis was originally buried in the Springfield City Cemetery, but his brother, Lewis Tutt, who was 5 years younger than Davis, had him disinterred and reburied in Maple Park in 1888. When Lewis died in 1900, he was buried beside his brother. Lewis's wife and son were eventually buried nearby. Shortly after the shootout, Hickok turned himself in. After a 3-day trial, he was found not guilty because he had acted in self-defense. Man, that's a good story. But is the legend true? As a professional historian, I have an obligation, a responsibility to ensure that what I'm telling you is factual, or I have to say that it's not. let's take a closer look at this legend. We know for certain that Hickok carried two 1851 Colt Navy 36 caliber pistols in a cavalry draw position, which meant that the butts on his pistols faced forward. Now this is an exact firing reproduction of the 1851 Colt Navy 36 caliber made by Uberti. Now the legends don't tell us what weapon Davis Tutt fired. So could Hickok have made that shot 75 yards? Well, I have a firing pistol. Let's go see. It's a beautiful day for a test like this. I'm going to try to recreate that shot that Wild Bill Hickok supposedly took in that duel against Davis Tutt that proved fatal for Tutt. Now the story goes that it was 75 yards. I've put a flag here as my starting point, and using my measuring wheel, we're going to see how far 75 yards is. Now that's 225 feet. Let's see. Okay, I'm at 100 feet. Wow. $150. Hopefully I have enough space to do this. 200. I'm right at this wood line right here. Can you still see me? This is 255 feet, 75 yards. That seems like a long way. I can barely see the camera from here. Maybe I can hit the target. I want to give you a little more information about the gun that Wild Bill Hickok supposedly used. This is a reproduction of an 1851 Navy. It was originally produced by Colt. This reproduction is done by Uberti. Now let me show you the size of the ball that we're shooting here. This is a 36 caliber ball. According to the stories, during the quick draw, Wild Bill pulled out his pistol, cross draw, and used his left arm for support. Now I'm not going to do a quick draw because, well, I'll end up shooting myself in the leg. So let's see if I can replicate that shot. Now let me get my hearing protection on, so I don't want to deafen myself. Get my safety glasses on. All right, let's see if we can do this. Okay, pistol is live. Oh yeah. Man, I like that. Let's see if I hit anything. This is my poor representation of Davis Tutt. Now I hung the flag here so I'd be able to see it at 255 feet, 75 yards. I figured this was going to take me a couple of times to make this shot, but look at this. First shot, I got him in the head. This is what I was aiming for, Pizza Hut. This would have been center mass. Supposedly, David Tutt was struck in center mass. He was struck in the right side here, and the bullet went inside through his rib cage, came out this side, which meant he wasn't standing like this or this. He was standing like this. Now, in most duels in history, you didn't stand like this because it made a huge target. You always stood sideways. That would explain why the bullet went in here and came out here. When I first really started looking into this, I thought this shot was impossible. 75 yards with a black powder pistol, I thought no way. But this was my very first shot of the day, and I got him in the head. Now, this pistol, the 1851 Navies, they were known for firing high. And I was aiming right here. You can see I went high. Most of them go high to the left, according to what I've read. But this one went high and a little bit to the right. Maybe it could be due to my older eyes. I'm about twice the age Wild Bill Hickok was supposedly at when this duel took place. So could this shot have happened in Springfield, Missouri, 1865? Absolutely. I think I'm going to shoot this some more. Now that we've learned that shot was possible, let's take a closer look at some of the other details. By most accounts, Wild Bill and Davis Tutt were friends. I find that hard to believe. Let me explain. Leading up to the Civil War, Wild Bill's family were staunch abolitionists. They believed that the enslavement of any race of people was unjust. During the Civil War, Wild Bill was a scout for the Union side. The Tutt family held the opposing view of slavery. Davis Tutt's father, Hansford, owned at least one slave, a woman. Many people have concluded that Hamp had a child with his slave, a boy named Lewis Tutt. Now remember, that Lewis Tutt was the younger brother who reportedly had Davis's body disinterred and reburied. Davis Tutt was a scout for the Confederacy during the Civil War. Wild Bill Hickok Union, Davis Tutt Confederate. We also have to remember that this gunfight supposedly took place in July of 1865, a little over 3 months after the Civil War ended. Tension between the two sides was still at a fever pitch, especially after the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. So could Davis Tutt and Wild Bill have been friends? It's possible, but highly unlikely. Now, if a gunfight happened on a courthouse square, it certainly would have made it into the local newspapers. If the gunfight had resulted in someone's death, it certainly would have made it into newspapers throughout the region. If that gunfight, which resulted in someone's death by the legendary Wild Bill Hickok, which led to his trial for murder, man, that would have made news throughout the country, maybe even around the world. But I could find no newspaper accounts referring to this event in 1865. I searched throughout the 1860s, 1870s, 1880s, 1890s, still no mention of the legendary gunfight. The first mention of this gunfight appeared not in any newspaper, but in Harper's New Monthly magazine in 1867, 2 years after the gunfight was supposed to have happened. In the article written by George Ward Nichols, the creator of the Wild Bill Hickok legend, Nichols told exaggerated tales of the hundreds of men that Hickok had killed. Most of the claims in Nichols' articles have been disproven. The first actual newspaper account I located which mentioned this event happened in an Arizona newspaper called the Tucson Citizen. The article was called Thrilling Adventures of Wild Bill Hickok. That article was published on May the 13th, 1928, 62 years after the gunfight was said to have happened. Today we have all sorts of avenues to get news, radio, television, and a myriad of other forms of digital technology. But in the 1860s, word of mouth and newspapers were the only source of reliable information. This story would have sold newspapers, and newspaper men would have recorded every single detail to draw the attention and money of readers. To use a modern term, this story would have gone viral. The next part of the story is that Davis Tutt is buried in Maple Park Cemetery in Springfield. He was originally buried in the Springfield City Cemetery, but his brother, Lewis Tutt, had him disinterred and reburied in Maple Park in 1883. Disinterring someone who had been killed in a duel with the famous Wild Bill Hickok would have renewed interest in the shootout, yet I could find no mention of it in any newspaper. But wait a minute, we can see Davis Tutt's headstone right next to Lewis Tutt's headstone. It's written in stone. Let's take a closer look at Davis Tutt's headstone. Davis Tutt's red granite headstone looks to be much newer than that of Lewis Tutt's. But if we look at the writing on the bottom of the other side of the headstone, we can see that it was dedicated in conjunction with Wild West Days, September the 11th, 1991. Wild West Days was a festival held on the old courthouse square in Springfield where the shootout purportedly occurred. One of the activities on noon that Saturday, September 14th, 1991, was a recreation of the shootout. As a bonus attraction, the person portraying Wild Bill signed autographs. I could find no photo of an earlier headstone for Davis Tutt. According to a newspaper article entitled "Set in Stone," the grave of Davis Tutt was unmarked until the new headstone was put in place in 1991. Would Lewis Tutt, who is said to be a prosperous merchant in Springfield, have gone to the expense to have his brother disinterred, reburied, and then not erect a headstone? I'm not convinced. Could the headstone have been stolen? Well, that's possible. But now let's take a look at Lewis Tutt's headstone. By all accounts, Lewis Tutt, Davis Tutt's younger brother, was born sometime in 1844. None of the stories include the month or date of his birth. The headstone for this Lewis Tutt has his date of birth carved in stone as November the 1st, 1827. That's a 17-year discrepancy, and that's a precise date. Could this date have been a simple mistake? It's highly unlikely that Lewis Tutt's widower's son would have accepted a stone with a date that was 17 years off. I could find no primary source documentation such as census records, voter lists, birth records, marriage records, military records, court documents, land transactions. No evidence at all of a Lewis Tutt being born in 1844. Now, I mentioned that Lewis Tutt had a son. Here's another fact that I must mention. Lewis Tutt and his wife, Emma, welcomed a new baby boy into the world. He was born on October the 16th, 1866, 1 year and 2 months after the purported shootout which claimed the life of Davis Tutt. According to this headstone, Lewis and Emma named him Davy Tutt. Could this mean that Lewis named his son after his slain brother? Well, that's likely. In this case, we have to look at the preponderance of evidence. If we were to present this information that I've just shown you before a jury in a modern criminal trial, the case would be laughed out of court. At every step, there is reasonable doubt. If you have any primary sources that suggest this shootout took place, please contact me through my website. Based on everything that I've discovered, I've come to the conclusion that this shootout was more legend than fact. But as Mark Twain always said, never let the truth get in the way of a good story. I'm Brad Dison. Thanks for watching, and now you know the rest of the story.